Welcome to Coleman Report Live. I'm Bob Coleman, and we're talking Main Street and the small business lenders who help it grow. The 10-20-20 edition. I love the numbers. I don't know what that means. Katie, thank you for joining us. Chris Hearn, CEO, founder, Fountainhead Capital, one of the 14 non-bank small business licensed SBA lenders. Chris, thank you for giving up your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's see. We're going to start right off with a plug for please consider our newsletter, our top 10 things you need to know. You send that to your board and you send it to your C-suite. Anybody who wants that. It's a fun project. What we do, we take the top 10 things they need to know. That way we don't have to give them hours and hours of reading. They can get up to date within 5 minutes. And Katie and I are starting to put together November. Do you know that, Katie?
No, I have been starting to make a list of all the topics that we need to make sure are covered in November. We are getting down to the last couple of weeks here. So I think there's going to be some very interesting things coming out of Congress, hopefully some good news that we can add in there. So
I love we're talking November 2020, Chris. I can't wait for this year to be over.
I think everybody's ready for 2021 at this point.
Let's do it. Hey, let's go to we have a ton of news. Let's get into it. Please, there's your certificate. And what is the biggest challenge for you for 2021? Are you concerned about the economy, legal and governance issues? That would also be regulatory, your local IT challenges, your risk management, i.e. portfolio, your infrastructure. We sort of took these from SBA in the Inspector General report of what they said that were the challenges for the agency. Chris, would you agree with those answers? Is that sort of where your head is?
It's absolutely where my head's at. Economic outlook and probably as a lender, risk management is number two for sure.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. It's interesting in how these change because we do this every year. A couple of years ago, infrastructure was number one, and everyone was trying to become more efficient. We're not saying that's in the back burner, but now there are other issues that are certainly overriding.
Bigger fish to fry, right?
Yeah. And that's, we had an interesting conversation yesterday, at least in 2000, difference between today and 2008, 2009. Today, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Right. Certain things that can happen and bam, we can be out of this. 2008, 2009, we were all asking the question, how low can we go?
Right.
So we're not there yet, but obviously there's a lot of people hurting, and as these deferments roll off, we're going to hear a lot more sad stories. What do you think SBA's biggest challenge is? You don't have to agree with the Inspector General.
I think if I can jump in here, Bob, I think fraud risk is got to be their top concern right now, given what happened.
Oh, very good. Yeah, Katie, what's your reporting show?
So the OIG came out with a list of basically the top issues that SBA is going to be facing in 2021 during the fiscal year, and they said fraud was definitely the biggest risk, especially in the PPP program, and also with some of the recent news with EIDL as well. But all of these are issues that they did bring up, so it's all, of course, for anybody to answer these. But the OIG did say they believe fraud's going to be the biggest issue.
Yeah, and that not only affects the agency, but also trickles down to the lenders as well.
Right. They said in that report, just to give you an idea of the numbers and why they believe that, they've had over 77,000 hotline calls about fraud, potential fraud. They've already started cases on 39. They have 39 fraud cases with 56 defendants as of the end of last month.
Chris, what is your best practice when you suspect fraud in a loan application, whether it's PPP or regular?
Well, regular, we don't suspect fraud very often because there's enough checks and balances. There's enough things that we filter out just through regular SBA policies and procedures. But PPP, this is why it's such a challenge. I mean, I know there's been a lot of media attention on the EIDL program, and fraud in that. And there's been a little bit recently, last few weeks, about PPP, but I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. I think it's going to be, if you're quoting 77,000, I mean, there's 5.2 million PPP loans. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to think 5 to 7 to maybe 10% are ultimately going to be suspicious fraud situations. I mean, I can tell you, we reported, well over 500 that were just submitted to us, and there were several hundred that we didn't even get a chance to submit to SBA that we suspected of fraud. But
I hope you're wrong. Well, 7% is pretty high.
Yeah, I think as we got closer to the deadlines, we originally had a deadline of June 30th with PPP, and then we had the deadline of August 8th. We saw an uptick in submissions of people that, and we've heard from obviously FBI and OIG dozens and dozens of times, and we're very confident in our processing, but I know that there's been some reports, particularly with fintech lenders, that I think the Bloomberg article last week said they had 15% of all PPP applications or fundings, I should say, but so far they've had 75% of all fraud situations that the Justice Department has investigated. I mean, I just think the folks that have never been an SBA prior to March, April of this year, I don't know that they realized some of the great checks and balances that we have in this industry. I remember early on saying that we were running a Cavers report on everybody, and what should we do if we have a positive hit? And we reached out to SBA, and they were like, "You're running a Cavers report on everybody?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." "Isn't everybody?" I'm like, "No." Okay. So we continued to say turn those PPP applicants down if they had a positive Cavers hit. But I know that there wasn't the kind of prudent lending, the kind of oversight that was necessary from a lot of the previously non-participating SBA lenders in the program.
It seems though the issues are, what is it, with 6 lenders? Is that still, that came out about a month ago, is that still the prevalent thought?
I would guess that's the case still. That was from a previous OIG report. And then we've recently heard that Bloomberg has done some research into it, and they believe a lot of that was in some of the fintechs that were being targeted. So it's very likely, because if those fintechs were heavily targeted, there weren't that many that were involved in the program. So it's very likely that we're still looking at a very small number of institutions where that came out of.
Well, how I spoke to, just to interject, Bob, I spoke to that reporter at Bloomberg, and how she came up with this story, among other things, was she just started going and looking at Secretary of State websites to determine, which is smart, because was part of our process of every submission, is to make sure to verify that entity had been in business by the the initial gating threshold of February 15th. And she said there were so many that weren't, that were recently reinstituted entities, or a friend of mine who used to run a CDC in Colorado just wrote something on LinkedIn the other day, and he talked about, he actually had the statistics for the number of EIN numbers in Colorado that were secured over the last 6 months, and it didn't correlate with the number of actual businesses starting up. Again, suspicious behavior, and I think it was some simple things like that you could have done as a lender to try to filter out some of this fraud, because $500 billion, you're gonna attract some bad apples, and you got to have the right policies and procedures to sift through that.
Well, let's talk about PPP 2.0, Katie. We all read all sorts of things. What's going on in Congress?
So Congress is set to vote on at least one of the proposed bills today. That's in the Senate. They have 2. There's a skinny bill version, and there's more of a full encompassing version that's going to have more than just small business issues. Both of the bills have a reauthorization for Paycheck Protection Program and some form of PPP forgiveness simplification. Other than that, a lot of this is happening behind closed doors. We don't really know all the details of these bills yet. Of course, I am hearing that there is a possibility that the skinny bill, they might not get to it today, that might get pushed to tomorrow. But we are talking that they need to pass this quickly if they want to get this passed before the election. So this is, they need to work on it, and they need to come up with a solution. And there is talk, everybody's talking about it. They're trying to come up with the solution. So hopefully we'll get something. I'm not seeing a lot of people be too positive about it, though.
Chris, what do you think?
I think the dysfunction continues. Actually, I wrote an op-ed piece about it yesterday that I'll shoot over to you. But the speaker and the treasury secretary are supposed to be speaking today, and today is the deadline.
They're talking, so that's good news.
And he's calling in from the Middle East. I think he's in Bahrain or someplace. I'm not sure. So we'll see how effective that is. And the people I've spoken to say McConnell is likely to bring up the skinny bill in the Senate tomorrow, depending on how things, what materializes today. I don't know that the skinny bill is going to get much traction, unfortunately. So, if I had to guess, they still can do something, okay? Remember, the CARES Act itself was done, from idea to passage took less than 2 weeks, so they can still do something.
Implementation less than a month, yeah. I mean, it was,
right, but whether they will or they won't, I know there's a tremendous amount of pressure, as there should be, on both parties, on all sides right now on this issue, because I do think there's a lot of people that need supplemental funds.
This is for both of you. Do we know what type of dollar amount that we're talking about for PPP 2.0? And is the forgiveness still 50? I know other trade groups are pushing for 150, even a little bit higher. Are we getting specific numbers yet?
Chris,
I'm sorry?
have you heard any specifics on it yet?
Well, the House bill, I think, has about 330 billion, sorry.
Trillion.
I always forget the zeros. Yeah, billion that was in that proposal, and I believe
Additional.
Yes, exactly. Well, part of it is they're going to repurpose the 135 billion that has been left on the table unspent that was previously authorized. But and then in the I think it's about the same number. I think it's right around 300 billion in the skinny bill for the Senate Republicans are going to propose as well. So and then in terms of the forgiveness, I believe what's on the table is going up to the 150, which is what's been talked about for a long time.
Great. Well, very good. Katie, you're following the trade groups, and what are the trade groups lobbying for these days?
So recently a letter went out to Congress about the EIDL advanced deduction on PPP. There was, I don't remember, but maybe between 6 and 8 trade groups on that list who are all saying that this advance is really a big, or the advance is really a big problem for the borrower because they didn't realize that was going to be deducted during the forgiveness process back when they were applying for these. So it's creating an undue burden on them, and of course that's going to trickle down to the banks and other lending institutions as well as we go forward, and as you start seeing people who cannot make the payments or after all the deferments are over and things like that.
Very good. Let's see, Chris, we have a question from Jean. I don't have the answer, and I don't know if you do, but we'll ask it anyway. How do you handle bankruptcy and PPP forgiveness?
We're not sure yet, Gene.
That's a good answer. Yeah.
There's we've gotten some hints, but there's been nothing that I'm aware of that's certain yet in terms of this. And I actually have a couple of our borrowers that are in the midst of filing bankruptcy that got an PPP loan. So we're very interested in finding out what the outcome will be. But I think this is going to ultimately go to the courts. So we'll see.
All right, let's finish up the show with Chris's expertise and as a leader, we're all department managers, whatever. In terms of what we're telling, we manage from the top down, also from the down to the top. As a department manager, what should you be advising your C-suite and your board, Chris, in terms of the number one issue, which is risk management? Let's go with risk management and start with that.
Well, I mean, it was our number two right. result on the poll after the economic outlook. I think the economic outlook has cast so much uncertainty on everything. But, fundamentally as a lender, you're involved in risk management. So, understanding where you're at. I think it's important to understand where your problem borrowers are at on a monthly basis. Probably some of us on this webinar still are receiving some CARES Act P&I payments, even though they officially stopped for existing borrowers on October 1st. If you made loans after April 1st, if you did any 7A loans or 504 loans after that, then there's a bit of a lag effect, and you may have some CARE Act payments for a few more months. But I think staying close to your borrowers is as critical as anything these days. I think what people will find is there's great variability from one industry to another, from one state to another. Not everybody is hurting, which is kind of interesting, but everybody's been impacted, certainly. So I think staying as close to the borrowers as you can, make sure you're up to date on your financial reporting that are hopefully as part of your, your covenants. I think that's really critical. Being willing to be flexible, this is, I think we can all agree, this is a sort of a once in a generation type of a, experience we're all living through. So
hopefully,
yes, exactly. So if you can be flexible with borrowers, there are going to need, there's going to be some that are going to need forbearance, and it's probably the humane and the moral and thing to do in many cases. And actually, it probably doesn't make sense to go immediately to up in arms and go to litigation. So I hope the lending community will be a little more reasonable, but understand it's you can't do these things forever. So I think having some frank discussions about this is pretty critical.
What should we be? And no one's going to disagree with your assessment that we need to focus on servicing and workouts. And I love your statement that litigation's last resort. SBA has said over and over the purpose of SBA is let's try to work this out.
Sure.
But I'm the CFO. I'm the department manager, and I'm crunching numbers for 2021. What type of loan production am I looking at? United Airlines president has said this is going to last through 2024.
Right.
What do I do? I'm putting numbers in my spreadsheet in terms of profitability and loan volume.
Well, I mean, that's a great question, Bob. I don't know that I have any simple, great answers, but I think
no one does. That's why I asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be I'm expecting a truly, I don't want to use the word euphoric, but I do think it's going to be a very positive time for SBA over the next 12 to 24 months. And the reason is because I've been through this a few times, and every time SBA steps up and the lending community of SBA lenders step up and they help out with the recovery efforts. And this time more than ever, with the spotlight that was shown on SBA and their lenders with PPP, I think it's a natural fit. So, but that goes back to your risk tolerance as an institution. If you're a small community bank or a small credit union that's just recently gotten into business loans, you may not have as much of a risk tolerance as a national SBA lender such as ourselves, for instance. So you're going to, chances are your institution's probably tightened up your credit standards substantially. There's probably industries, any ICS codes you don't want to touch. You've probably increased your minimum debt service coverages, maybe your minimum FICO scores, and all that's prudent and reasonable to do so. Probably, making sure that your loan loss reserves are well capped up, I should say, and maybe increasing that. I think these are all prudent measures, but I think there's going to be a lot of folks that are confident in SBA lending and their own internal processes and procedures that they're going to view this as an opportunity, as some of us do, to try and help as many people as we can. And there will be.
So let's finish by wrapping up with what Katie reported yesterday. What Chris is saying, Katie. So how do we take what Chris is saying and we take all this news and all of a sudden we find out 23% of Main Street is quote optimistic? What's the disconnect?
Some of it's going to be in certain industries, like Chris kind of hinted at. Not everybody is struggling. There are some industries that are doing quite well. So that's going to be part of it. Of course, they're probably not pulling any of those businesses that are already completely closed and shut down. So anybody who's already out of business, they're not going to be part of those more recent polls. But everybody also sees the light at the end of the tunnel. This
Right.
isn't
That's what I
a
see.
permanent thing, and everybody's going to see that, well, business might be awful right now. People are still going to need essentially most of those same businesses once we come out of this. So I think a lot of people are still optimistic on that front, that we're still going to
One
get
or
out.
two things is going to happen. Either we're going to get a vaccine or we're going to burn itself out. And so we know there's a finite end. None of us can read the date, obviously, but that's going to happen.
Right.
Hey,
There's
real
an
quick.
end to all this.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. There's an end coming. We just don't know when.
Yeah. Unlike 2008, 2009, where we were looking at, checking out caves. Real quick, Lance is doing a webinar tomorrow. What are the critical steps you need to do for 60 days delinquent? Just we can take registrations the rest of today, obviously tomorrow morning. Shoot an email to joseph@colemanreport.com and he will do all the paperwork. Chris, thank you for your time. Katie, as always, thank you for your insights. And thank you for joining us today for Coleman Report Update and for supporting America's Main Street, one entrepreneur at a time. Thank you.
Take
Have a
care,
great
everybody.
day.